Welcome to today's episode, the podcast where we discuss the most recent installments of a different series every show. It is Monday, May 19th. Happy birthday, Marshmallow. The Murderbot Diaries are a science fiction book series by Martha Wells that began in 2017. In 2023, Apple formally announced that it was moving ahead with a TV adaptation starring Alexander Skarsgård. The first season premiered on Friday, the 16th, with 2 episodes, FreeCommerce and Eye Contact. Each installment is a half hour long and follows the early chapters of Martha Wells' first book, All Systems Red. Now, you read the book, I read the book, we read it in different ways. I listened to the Audible because it was free, and also because it was talked about in the same vein as The Martian, which is considered one of the best audiobooks to listen to of all time. It's one big stream conscious of this robot who is just going about his life in the future, and he calls himself Murderbot. He calls all of his sec units that he's a part of Murderbots. We'll get into the summary in a second, but I was curious what you thought of just the book itself.
I thought that the book was good. It was really, really short, and I believe that the first 4 books kind of tell an overarching story, and then it concludes. And then the 5th book is actually like a full-on novel. But what they called Murderbot, I think, with the first 4 books is novellas because of how short they are.
Huh. I thought novellas were Spanish soap operas.
I think they are, but I think that they also call it this for short books.
It's funny because the Murderbot loves to watch soap operas. Yeah, let's run down the plot of the show. We'll give our pros and cons, our comparisons to the show, other shows, reception, and then our final rating. Sound good?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, summary of episode 1, which is called FreeCommerce, one word. In the future, there's this evil empire. We can all think about that. It's probably going to happen. It's a mega corporation called Corporation RIM, and it controls everything from the government point of view, space research to an army of sec unit robots, these cyborg guards, right?
Yeah.
One day, this hippie, progressive, lovey-dovey team of research scientists from a freehold planet, that's sort of how they're announced in the thing. He literally says that they're hippies.
Yeah.
When you say freehold planet, they define it in the book as an unaffiliated with the corporation, but they still need the corporation's input and the bond agency's input if they want the funding to do research. And so they reach out. It reminds me a lot of Holden from Expanse. When he was raised in this colony, he had 5 different moms, and he was just this country bumpkin guy who ended up doing space travel in the sky. But yeah,
But with Murderbot here,
right.
They kind of actually go deeper into the crew. Just in the book, you're just supposed to, it's 5 people, and they have the same names: Rathy, Pinley, Bardwaj, and then there's Dr. Mensa. But here you're actually given their backstories.
Yeah, because you're seeing it as an ensemble cast. It's not one stream of consciousness from the narrated point of the robot. However, Murderbot does have a lot of narration that he does, but they try to tell the story in a little different order,
Right.
rather than having Murderbot just explain what's happening about, midway through chapter 1. You get at the very beginning, it's this group called the, what are they, Preservation Alliance, and they're applying to go out on this expedition to check out this planet and see if it's good enough to do terraforming on. So they have a geophysicist and someone who studies wormholes and someone who's just a biologist, all the different types of scientists. And they're all applying for this permit to go and do what they need to do. However, the company that they're applying for, the corporation, says you have to take one of our sec units. You have to take one of our guards. Now, because those guards are really smart AI, they consider them kind of humans, and they consider what they do. The Preservation Alliance considers this to be an indentured servitude type deal. And so they really are resistant against taking a sec unit. However, they are coerced into doing so because otherwise they won't be able to do their research.
And the sec unit that they took jailbroke himself earlier in the episode. So
yeah, and the reason he jailbroke himself, he hacked his government module. That's his security override. That's the thing that kind of forces him to do certain commands or follow orders,
right.
Is because of some past event. In the show, he doesn't remember what exactly happened. Actually, in the show, he hacks it before that happened, before
Right.
some disaster happens. In the book, it was a little bit more clear. He actually hacked his government module after some tragedy that had happened on his previous ship.
Well, I have the quote.
Right. Go ahead.
It says, I did not hack my governor module to kill my clients. My governor module malfunctioned because the stupid company only buys the cheapest possible components. In malfunction, I lost control of my systems and I killed them. And he's referring to 57 people that he killed when they went on some mining expedition.
Right. So sec units, even though they're there for your security, aren't necessarily very safe to be around. So that's just another reason why the Preservation Alliance is a little wary. However, they take him on and they end up setting up habitat on this planet. And 22 days later, they're attacked by a two-headed centipede in the middle of one of their research things that they're doing, the survey that they're doing. And the crew becomes very shook. There's a few things that become like revelations to them. First is that the planet is way more dangerous than they were promised. Two is that the Murderbot exposes that he has a human face.
Right.
One of the things
which
that
he was never supposed to do.
I guess not. But why make him have a human face then?
Well, I think it was that way in the book as well.
Absolutely. But in the show, they say any Murderbot would not show their face. And he did because he was trying to break the person out of their shock that they had seen their friend get like eaten by a centipede or half eaten by a centipede, right?
And it's worth noting that the centipede was the first scene of the book, or at least the first chapter of the book.
Right. And so it starts off with a bang, similar to in The Martian. It also starts off with something crazy happening. And so it becomes apparent pretty quickly that this sec unit is unlike other sec units, and that leaves the crew kind of in a tailspin. But at the same time, he's freaking out, or it's freaking out, the Murderbot's freaking out about what the crew might do to him, if they're going to turn him into scrap metal, if they're going to turn him in, what he needs to do to protect himself. And then lastly, they also realize that the maps aren't updating correctly on their feed, and they're not able to see these very dangerous locations very well. It's becoming extremely glitchy. And so at first they're just blaming the computer system and saying this is because of cheap service. But as time goes on, and as we're led to believe by the end of episode 2, you just know that there's something up, right? And so while Murderbot is very paranoid about being outed and scrapped, he ultimately calms himself by watching soap operas.
TV shows, which is, yes, that's straight out of the book.
Sanctuary Moon, but it's like the rise and the fall of Sanctuary Moon is his favorite TV show, starring John Cho, Clark Gregg, Jack McBrayer, DeWanda Wise. It reminded me so much of Space Avenue 5. Like that space show on HBO.
Yes.
Because not only did they have that comedy where Hugh Laurie's out in space, but then back on Earth, they have their own dramatized version, soap opera, which they would cut to. And it almost looked like they used the same set from there.
What was funny was that Alexander Skarsgård, he's good friends with Jack McBrayer, so that's how they got him. But Paul Wise and Chris Wise, they're brothers. They're the people that created this TV series. They were good friends with John Cho. And I agreed with one of the articles I read that said that it was almost a redemption type of thing for John Cho with Cowboy Bebop and Netflix.
He's only been in like 10 seconds of this, so he would have to be in a lot more for some form of... Also, he was in Star Trek, so he's just done a ton of space shows. He went from Harold and Kumar, and then he was like, I'm going out of planet. So episode 2 comes along. It's called Eye Contact. Dr. Mensa is the leader of the Preservation Alliance, and the other researcher, Bardwa, is, I don't know if it's Bardwaj, the lady who got nearly chomped in half by the centipede. She actually recovers very quickly, and so they decide to go off on a side mission, and they leave the sec unit, the thing that protected them from the first attack, behind for absolutely no good reason.
Yeah, I thought that just kind of was there to pad runtime. It didn't seem...
Yes, it's the biggest departure from the book. It is a critical error because, like, anybody who realizes your maps aren't updating on a space mission and then decides to go off on another space mission and then leave the one thing that was protecting you behind, it absolutely makes no sense. And what they do in that place, the Murderbot is mad because of it, but he spends that entire episode in a conversation with Dr. Garathan, who doesn't trust the Murderbot all that much anymore. He's the augmented human. He's able to do some of the same things that Murderbot can do, but obviously Murderbot is going to be quicker at a lot of the computing mechanics.
What did you think of Dr. Garathan?
I thought it was funny that they got the guy who was in all that stuff in
Late
the last
Night with
Polka
the
Dot
Devil.
Polka Dot Man.
Yeah.
Yes. How do you pronounce his last name? Dost Malkian?
Dost Malkian, yeah.
Yes. So that was cool to see Dost Malkian and Skarsgård face off. I think that's why they wrote it that way. However, I don't think it was very successful. Episode 2, I didn't like. Episode 1, I was in favor of. They spent about more than 50% of it was directly from the novel, except they had to change the way it was told because obviously you couldn't just have narration the entire time. So I was okay with that. Episode 2 really made me mad because by the end of the episode, it concludes with Mensa almost dying, right?
Mhm.
Because of course she does. And then she returns. Dr. Garathan apologizes for being paranoid about the robot, and the Preservation Alliance finally realizes that they should contact Deltfall, which is the other survey group, which is on a different continent of the same planet, but who's like a bigger survey group and would know if there's some sort of security risk
And
that they should be aware of.
we see Deltfall's
Yes.
group.
And then we see that they're dead. But in the book, they've been in contact with Deltfall from the very get-go, from the first attack, because that was a smart science crew. They dumbed down the science crew in the TV show to make our main character, the Murderbot, a little bit more likable. And so I have my pros and I have my cons. But do you have pros and cons?
Well, I was just going to talk about a little bit in the book when they
Mhm.
go to meet Deltfall. It's a reveal that they're all dead, and then you actually get the answer as to why.
Right. And you also see one of the sec units is dead too.
Yes, right.
Mhm.
But my question is, was it the pacing that was wrong with episode 2 that you felt? Like, yeah, let's get into your pros and cons.
Okay, so I'll start with pros. It's a cool uniform.
Yes. So actually, I do have a couple facts about that.
Yeah.
They were trying to figure out how they were going to do the design for it. Martha Wells even had some input on the costume
Nice.
design. That's again the author. And they said when it first came out, it just looked like a stormtrooper. But
That's what I was concerned about. When I saw the thing, I was like, they did a really good job with this design.
apparently it was Skarsgård that wanted that strange like eye in the middle of it because he
Swirl.
it was I forgot what the character's name was. Oh, Petey from the Little Rascals. Always, I guess, when they did the cartoon or something, they had a large black circle around his eye, and so that's why they ended up deciding to do it. That was his input. It
And since
reminded
that costume is almost on screen as much as he is when he's not naked.
and
It's important to make it look cool.
and the funny thing is, he said that he waxed himself for 6 months. He even talked to Chris Wise, the creator of the TV series, and Chris Wise was like, "You don't have to do that." And he's like, "No, no, no. I think it's going to help the role more." Not knowing that the next role he was going to take, he has to play a hairy biker in. So-
Okay. They did have so many shirtless and like Ken doll scenes of him. The first time they showed it and he was just naked, it was funny. It even falls into like one of the jokes that I laughed at. But after like the third time, where in the books he constantly talks about how he likes it when they leave him alone
Mhm.
and that they don't go into his private, I don't know, little room dorm thing that he's in. I think the joke was overplayed. I don't know, but maybe it's just because they have Skarsgård and they don't want to be the Mandalorian where they never get to see his face.
Yes, that is true because Skarsgård said he had trouble breathing in the suit and said the experience was like wearing a really thick human-sized condom.
Okay. It's also got a cool cast. Obviously, you get any Skarsgård in your cast, and that's going to be a good job because they all seem to be good actors, right? And then David Dastmalchian, we already mentioned him, but should I recognize other people other than obviously the soap opera people?
I don't think so. I know that the creators of the series they have a strange dynamic because like I said, they're both brothers, but one, Paul Wise, has worked on a lot of comedies, American Pie, Nutty Professor 2, Little Fockers, and In Good Company. And then Chris Wise has worked on a lot of like dramas.
So this is the second show in a row that has had a brother pair that's in the industry because you had the Hollies in the last thing. Then obviously with Marvel Comics, you always have the Russo brothers, and then you have the Duffer brothers for Stranger Things. It seems like a very brother philic industry.
Right, but the weird thing about them is that with Chris Wise, he's in a lot of dramas. Twilight, New Moon, Star Wars, Rogue One, Pinocchio, Afraid. This is actually the first thing they worked on since About a Boy, a movie that came out in 2002, where both worked on.
That's the Tony movie from Skins, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's the first thing they worked on since then, and I thought that was probably a good idea because in the book, it's obviously a comedy, but it has its drama bits, its sci-fi bits, so I thought that it really worked well together.
So Nicholas Hoult, and then who was the guy from Hereditary again?
Alex Wolff?
Sorry, not Hereditary. Heretic.
Oh, Hugh Grant?
Hugh Grant. So Hugh Grant and Nicholas Hoult. That was About a Boy, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so but then my third big pro, and this is probably the biggest pro for the show, is that it does try to retain its accuracy of the book. Even in the second episode, it's not like it's just wasting time, but it's not departing from the source material where it can't turn around,
Right.
and then eventually end up in the same place. So I'm going to say it's commendable that over 50% of the lines are like, or not 50% of the lines, but like 50% of the plot at least is directly from the book, and also the lines. Sometimes they're direct lines, sometimes they're direct moments. My favorite moment of the first 2 episodes is after the centipede attack, when you literally see the Murderbot, and even though it happens in the ship on the book, you see how he's got a big chunk out of his midsection and it's just dripping with blood, but he's fine. And that's what's leading Dr. Arda to be further in shock and stuff. And so like those moments I think were really well captured.
I agree with you also, like, kind of the crew being nice to him and him being kind of off-put about it. I thought that there was a couple differences. One that I mentioned, or one that I should mention, is that I felt like, Murderbot, he was more evil in
Yeah,
this.
that's one of my cons.
Okay,
So we'll
okay.
get to the cons, but I want to concentrate on the good
Yes,
part,
yes.
which is the stuff that they kept with it, the repair abilities, the med bay being able to cure Bardwaj or whatever her name is so quickly, that you could stay or here or you could go. That
Yeah.
line when he's offered to hang out with them and he makes it very clear that he likes being a loner. And then also when as soon as he got back to the ship, having saved Bardwaj, one of the lines that really stuck with me from the book was when one of Roddy, is that his name? He ran
Robbie,
out
yeah.
and he was like, "I'm going to go get the equipment," and they're like, "What are you doing? That's insane!" And then they consider saving life more important than saving the study that they're doing, which is much different than what Murderbot is used to, where he sees humans treat each other as disposable. And so that's why he sees this group and he's happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the Wise brothers even said they didn't take anything away from the book. If anything, they just added to it. So
Right.
during every single script that they wrote, they always went to Martha Wells and they got her notes on it just to make sure that it was accurate
But
enough.
what Martha Wells did so well was she condensed it to like a 2 hour to 3 hour book if you're just listening. Like
Yeah.
that's a super short, concise book. And they came in and they said, let's add some fat. Like, let's add some stuff that doesn't necessarily have to be there. And because there's like 8 or 7 books, right?
7. Yeah.
One of my complaints is that why did they need to? Why I understand if they were trying to milk out a first season because they were like, we can only do one book per season.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're only going to be doing the first book.
And it's 10 episodes. So they really have to elongate this thing rather than they could have done like 2 or 3 books in
Yeah.
one season, a series of unfortunate events style, because they were able to do that there. Anyways, so the humor is my last big pro, which I did laugh a few times where it was like, didn't go for the perimeter thing. That was one of the lines the Murderbot said when he keeps on trying to say that whenever he wants to get out of there. And he's like, I got to go check the perimeter. And then at the last second, what's his face? Gurathan, he was like, absolutely not. Right now, I want you to stay here. Also, when he admitted that he doesn't like to think at all, that was funny, his Kendall appearance. And then the injected sex scene that he put into Gura's face, or like, when he was like looking into his head, poking
Yeah.
around there, and then he suddenly had to see his crewmates having a throuple. That was pretty funny. But yeah, then I get to my cons.
Okay, yeah. So I get to your cons then, because I'm interested about that.
All right. So number one is that the book is one big stream of consciousness, and I miss it. Kind of like with The Martian, no matter what they were going to do, even with Matt Damon, even with it like getting a lot of awards and reception was good for it, I didn't like that movie nearly as much as I enjoyed listening to the audiobook. There was just something about that and kind of putting my mind into that person's. This is like, you got to keep on flipping back between the Murderbot and the rest of the cast.
As you were saying, it's one stream of consciousness. You follow Murderbot throughout the entire book. You always get his perspective. What Martha Wells is known for is writing speculative fiction, and that's really where you kind of base the story more on the humans. I feel like with Murderbot, the story was kind of in the background. You really got a good sense of who Murderbot was.
And that's what's funny about it, is like he was telling kind of an intense action adventure story, while from his perspective, he was never really that scared, and he was
Right.
also in danger, but it was so quick moving that like it was fun.
And I feel like in the TV series, it's more focused on trying to give a plot. And it's like, yeah, you understand who Murderbot is, but just not as well as the book.
But similar to The Martian, where they added the whole, like a lot more of what was going on back at Earth, and you were seeing that whole storyline play out, that drama play out, like adding that sort of drama to this type of show when the robot is supposed to be a little less emotional. I don't know. It doesn't fit as well with me. That's a con. Also, my patience is waning. I'm really sad with episode 2, but Skarsgård, I like that he's playing the Murderbot. I do. But he has a really tough job because he has to play a selfish, human-hating, antisocial, know-it-all killing machine who lies, is prone to whiny narration, mood swings, and has fragmented memory, something that they added.
Yeah.
And just like the Eternaut, they implanted PTSD into our main character. for one reason or another, just to kind of extend things. How they try to make him likable, on the other hand, is interesting. They make him good at his job, just like in the book. He does save the crew. He does check what he needs to check. And he is omnipotent because he's able to see every single camera feed and understand what the crew has discussed behind his back.
One of my favorite parts is when he was talking to Gurathan, but he decides to, because he doesn't like eye contact,
Right.
watch the conversation from a different camera. I thought that was pretty
Hence
creative.
the name of the second episode. So he's smart. Yeah. He's calculating, not bogged down by any emotions. He's a pragmatic decision maker. That comes across later in the books, where because he's hacked his governor module, he's literally able to make the most utilitarian decisions, even if the crew doesn't want him to.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's also a victim. And an underdog. So there's like a lot of reasons to sort of want to root for him for that. He's special because not a lot of sec units are able to even do the hacking. He's kind of in that way like the Star Wars Finn, where he's like, he broke free from the stormtrooper thing. And then his human side does show in the way that he likes to do sarcasm a lot. He stays below the radar, so he's a little bit of an introvert. He likes to watch a lot of TV. And then making the survey group super incompetent. This was one I wasn't a fan of, but it does aid us liking his character more than them, because it's almost like if you don't like the crew, then you're going to have to like him. But I think it backfires, because instead of liking Murderbot, you just make everybody kind of pissed off of this poor decision making.
And I feel like the show tried to kind of pay attention to that, because they're the ones who are like, we have to check Deltfall, and he's calling them like stupid humans this whole entire time. But I agree with you, even though I didn't feel like in the first book of Murderbot, purposefully so, you didn't understand a lot of the characters, you still could understand where they were coming from, why they were making the decisions that they did. Here it seems like
we have to flesh everybody out.
Yeah, it's like we have to just give everyone, even the throuple thing, which I know you kind of laughed at.
I laughed at the joke of him putting it into someone's head, but I didn't like, because in the book, Murderbot could just tell that they're attracted to one another. But these are research scientists. They aren't going to be some freaking Real Housewives of like whatever, you know. They're not going to just be hooking up in the back every second that they could get. And so they added that. I wasn't a big fan of that. They treat you like you're pretty dumb when you watch this show. They spoon feed you a lot of the information. It's repetitive, where he's from, why you should feel bad for him. But my biggest problem with the show is, like you were talking about, the padding of the runtime. It doesn't improve the story. The title of the book series is Murderbot Diaries, and the title of this show is Murderbot, and yet so much time with the ensemble storyline, the side missions, the throuple storyline. Why are we as like a culture so resistant about letting one main character lead a show? Look at Rick from The Walking Dead in the first episode, probably one of the best episodes of that show.
Yeah.
Look at Last Man on Earth and Will Forte in the first episode of that, also one of the best episodes of the series. I know it's hard to write those because you literally have one star that's just going around and making decisions on their own, but when they do it right, it's epic. And so if they had spent the time to try to adapt Murderbot Diaries into something different, where it was all from his point of view and not like mixed up a little bit as much as they made it here, I think it would have been truly even more incredible. Murderbot and his motivations, the PTSD, I got a little tired of that. Just make him know that he killed a lot of people in the past.
Yeah, I didn't understand why they needed to change his backstory at all. I guess that it worked well in the novel. It could work well here.
Yeah, and you said it yourself. He sounds more angry and hateful in this than he does in the story, in the book, right?
Yeah.
Because like he's talking about killing the humans that he's working with plenty of times, while in the book he begrudgingly is like kind of liking them. And I understand they want to do an arc where by the end of it he's going to be risking himself every single day, and he wouldn't actually kill the humans.
Right.
We've already sort of seen that here, but at the same time it's like he's way more sus and he's way more paranoid, and they made the crew less smart and talented at their jobs. So I don't know.
And by kind of changing his backstory, by not having him kill all those people, it really does make him less like empathetic and rooting for him.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to my last con, which is that even though the show is called Murderbot, it doesn't feel scary. It doesn't feel tense. Like the book does. And it doesn't feel like the scientists are using much common sense. So it's just frustrated. Like it feels almost low budget in a way. I understand the centipede battle's expensive. I understand the off the map thing. But when they're in the stasis chamber or wherever, the habitat, right? It felt like we were getting a lot of scenes in there, and there wasn't much happening besides just like dialogue between the different scientists.
I didn't realize it until the second episode, but yeah, Gurathan and Murderbot really do just before like the last 10 minutes of that talk for a majority of the episode. It takes up
It's
a
supposed to be
lot
a
of
chess
time.
game, but really, it's like
The
what do we
dialogue
get?
wasn't good enough to be a chess game,
What
though.
do we get at the end of it is other than Gurathan saying I shouldn't have let you guys go alone to the leader of the crew, who you would think the leader would send someone else out on the crazy expedition other than herself and also the person who was just attacked by the centipede, like that they would have sent to maybe less suited or more suited for that role.
And I know that Martha Wells kind of created that part of it, the Ring of Dead Creatures. That was one of the
Oh, the
sections.
alien synthetics. That feels a
Yeah.
little new from the book, or at least it comes along later.
Well, yeah, and so I mean, you liked the first episode, you didn't like the second episode. What would you rate it?
I would say like I came in there with super high expectations. So even though I liked the first episode, it still let me down a tiny bit. I would compare this to like Mickey 17,
Yes.
especially the way that he talked. For some reason or another, their voices sounded kind of similar to me. And because I had listened to his voice in the Murderbot Diaries, I didn't like Alexander Skarsgård voice to begin with.
See, I didn't have that problem because again, I read it, but I felt like at the very, very beginning when he's first kind of being a robot, it was almost like Alexander Skarsgård was doing a bad impression of Jordan Peterson. So when he kind of broke out of that,
Right.
I actually got a little used to it.
I didn't think about that because I haven't listened to Jordan Peterson, but I have thought about like it sounded almost like a kid's movie,
Yeah.
like a pop or like I don't know how to describe it.
He starts off the series being like, "Now let's get this adventure started," and that's what
Yeah.
goes into the intro.
And there's obvious sarcasm in there. There's irony, but it also feels like you're being talked down to a bit.
Well,
Dexter, Mr. Robot,
yeah.
those are serious voices where they provide scary terms and justification that you can still find their humanity in those characters. That shows you what I was expecting.
It seems like I always bring it up when we talk about a robot show, but it reminded me of I Am Mother, the Netflix series, kind of based off the same thing. Has to do with an evil robot and some humans. But what would you rate it overall?
Ultimately, after 2 episodes that feel a little clunky, I think it's recoverable. I do want to continue watching the series. So for that reason, I have to give it at least a 6.5. But I think I will keep it at a 6.5 with the hope that it will get even better.
It's gotten a lot of good reviews. It has
Good.
98% on Rotten Tomatoes, audience score of 80%, 7.5 on IMDb. NPR called it the best new comedy of 2025. Guardian gave the series 3 out of 5 stars and called Alexander Skarsgård hella cool. But in my negative review, and I say negative review because it seems like there aren't that many, Slant Magazine wrote one of the few negatives that gave it and they gave it 2 out of 4 stars, was that the episodes are strained for heavy reliance on Murderbot's snarky internal monologue.
Right. He comes across whiny.
Right.
And that never was an issue in the books. That because probably partially because of the voice, but also because they didn't add the lines of him wanting to kill the people who he is tasked with trying to save the whole time. Like if we saw, I think 3 or 4 times where Skarsgård straight up was just like, "I wish I could kill these people right now."
Yeah.
And I was just like, "Why?"
That was so jarring because again,
I get you're a Murderbot, so
Right.
I'm not like why, as in like this makes no sense whatsoever. But I also think like for the show's likability station, they could have made this Murderbot a little bit more creative and a little less murder oriented. I don't know. That sounds weird now.
And though we'll end it on this. Did you recognize that there were 2 characters that were in the book that were not in the TV series and
No,
won't be?
because when I read or listened to the book, it was a while ago.
Okay, Oversay and Valescu. And Oversay was a scientist from the Preservation Alliance, and Valescu was a scientist also from the Preservation Ox Survey team. They are not in the series, but Arata, the person that played them, said that her character is an amalgamation of some characters in the book, so I'm sure they kind of took them and put them into her character.
Yeah, the part of the reason is probably because Apple likes small casts. But I did wonder when I saw that space mission, and I was like, that is a tiny group of, like, that's the freelance, whatever. That's a really small survey team. Anyways, okay, show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.